I just read you're working on a new album. Is that true?
For Heaven and Hell we are, yes.
Yeah, for Heaven and Hell. With some of the old guys.
With Tony and Geezer and Vinny, the same guys that we just did the last thing with, yeah.
Are you all writing together? Or?
Tony and I and Geezer are writing together, yeah.
Is it just like it was in the old days? Or?
No, it's very much different, really. We've done it in two different ways anyway. The first album, Tony and I virtually wrote the first album, Heaven and Hell, because Geezer had gone. He was there for about 2 days after I joined the band, and he was gone. He had some personal problems, and perhaps he had some problems with not, having the same band that was there for all of his life, really. So Tony and I wrote everything on the first album, although we gave credit to everyone on it. That was the way they did things, and so I agreed to it. And the second album we did more with our instruments in the studio, with the drums set up, and just kind of bashed it out. I found that very difficult. The third album, we kind of did it both ways. And that kind of worked and didn't work. So I guess we found the best way to do it was the way we had done it first, which was really with Tony and myself. And then we wrote 3 songs for an album that was the Black Sabbath, the Dio years. And those 3 songs just Tony and I wrote. And this time, because we've actually written 6 songs so far for it. And because Geezer lives in Los Angeles, I live in Los Angeles, Vinny lives in Los Angeles, Tony came in, and we did it in my studio at my home, but just to write. So it was a lot easier, with a drum machine and not real drums, and Tony's ideas, my ideas, a few of Geezer's, and it worked a lot better this way. So I think we found a really good pattern to use this time.
Because it seems to me, it seems sort of like the metal is having a renaissance, especially in Europe.
Seems it, yeah.
All the big bands are out touring Europe this year, and do you have an idea? Any idea why that is?
Well, I think that the last trend is gone, and we live in a trendy world, and I think a new generation of kids have come along and discovered what was, which was the metal, whatever we're talking about here, and they embraced it themselves because to them it was new, and the people who came before them didn't embrace it, and so for them it was like, oh, you didn't like this? Good, we do. Rock and roll is such a generational thing anyway, and people like to have their own music. They like to grow up with what they like. And I think in the case of the resurgence of so many of the older bands, like ourselves or Priest or whomever it may be, it's the best form of that music. It always was. The songs were better, I think. Sure, there's some good young kids coming up, but nothing like what was. Those were great songs that have stood the test of time, so kids have embraced them. And so it spawned another generation of bands, hopefully, that will be the next us, I hope. But I think it's because they wanted to have their, what they consider to be the music for their generation, and it happened to be, metal music.
Yeah, because now we're touching a subject which I was going to ask you about later, but we can do it now, because I'm also doing a story about the guitar riff, which sort of, I think, in the last years I almost haven't heard a good guitar riff. You have a sort of band like White Stripes and Queens of Stone Age. They do have some, but and like if you take Dio, you have Holy Diver, which is who came up with the riff for Holy Diver? Was it you or?
I did. Yeah.
When you came up with it, did you feel how come it works? Is it possible to say?
Well, I felt that it would work. It was the kind of music that I've done most of my life, and it just felt right to me. Tempo-wise, it felt right. The riff felt right. Just as when I was in Rainbow, after Richie had written "Smoke on the Water," obviously, which is one of the great riffs of all time, he wrote the riff to the song "Man on the Silver Mountain," which worked yet again. So perhaps writing "Holy Diver" was a little bit of, well, I know what works, and so I'll do something in that vein. But you're absolutely right. The great riff writers that just aren't there anymore. I've been lucky enough to work with certainly 2 of the greatest ones, Tony Iommi and Richie Blackmore. And Tony is the best. There's nobody better at writing riffs than Tony.
Yeah, the Iron Man, which is also one of the...
Well, you can name any of them, really. Heaven and Hell. Just anything that he seems to put his hand to is special because it comes from his darkness or from his attitude. And he just has so many of them, and it's just fantastic. He has so many that you have to stop him at times. No, we've got enough. Oh, okay. And sometimes there's some wonderful, we'll take a great riff and begin the song with it and then put another of his riffs into the same song. I just think that the art of writing that way had gone away for a while because riffs weren't necessary for the next trend of music that came along. I mean, grunge music, which really knocked heavy metal music, off its perch, wasn't really that riff-oriented. It was more song-oriented and certainly more socially oriented. In the case of Nirvana, who were, bitching and moaning about what was happening to their generation, any more than the punk generation wasn't really that riff-ridden either. And that was social commentary. So it didn't need a riff. What it really needed was an attitude. But we grew up writing riffs, and songs were based around a riff. I mean, the explanation, I don't know why. Again, maybe it's because generationally, the next generation said we don't want to hear riff music anymore. We hear this and we like it, and so the bands, well, we don't have to write riffs anymore. I think Guns N' Roses, I don't think that's really as much of a riff band as as the ones that came before them. But there's a little bit more riff writing in there, from Welcome to the Jungle and a few other things. But I just think it became a lost art. So maybe because the great riff writers are still around and are still writing songs, maybe it appeals to that generation of people now. But you're absolutely right. The riff went away.
Because what I think is a good riff, as Sam said, it has to be like almost everyone can play it, but not, it's sort of like Christopher Columbus and the egg. So it seems so easy, but you have to come up with it. It's possible to say.
Sure.
What is a good riff? Is it possible to sort of say anything about it?
Well, a good riff is exactly what you said. It's simple. I'm not a great guitar player by any stretch of the imagination. I'm a vocalist. I was a bass player for a long time. I used to write things on bass. Bass is a little bit more difficult to write riffs on because it's such a singular instrument. So when I wrote riffs, I wrote like everyone would write a riff. And I always thought that was important, that the riff that you write should be able to be played by the kid who's sitting in his room listening to it. Oh, I can play that. That attracts him to that. So I think that the answer is that the more simple the riffs are, of course they have to be attractive. They have to be, consciously attractive. But I think the more simple they are, the better it is for the song, because then everyone can take part in it. It's just like a good song, a good lyrical piece, that's something that people can sing along with. All the songs that are still around have things that people can sing along with. I mean, even from the point of, no matter what his lifestyle was, but what's his name? I can't even think of the guy who got arrested. Was it Gary Glitter? The thing that they always play at all is hey, hey. Maybe you don't know that song. But it's played absolutely everywhere. I mean, everywhere in all of the football stadiums, because it's singable. It's sing-alongable, just like a riff is playable by everyone. So the answer is that the simpler the riff, really, the more attractive it becomes.
But a good riff has an enormous effect, which I probably guess you see on stage. For instance, when you play Holy Diver and people hear the guitar, it's possible for you to describe how the audience reacts when they sort of hear the guitar around.
Yeah, they do react to it, but I think the important part of it is that it's not just the riff. I mean, you can just play a great riff, and if there's nothing that comes after it, or nothing that's good after it, then what's the sense in that? Had it not been for Smoke on the Water being sung that way, or the song would just be dun, 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 forever and ever and ever. So what happens is that because the riff begins the song, that's the first thing you hear. So a successful song has something that you lock onto right away. So it's a great riff has to have a great melody and a great texture inside of it to make it attractive. So it's not just the riff. It's a combination. It's always been the combination. Just as one singer is not going to make success of a band, because unless the others are as good as he is or she is, or at least approachable, then that band is not going to be any good. So it's all part and parcel. Just like the song has to have a lot of good parts in it, like a good watch that runs well. A riff doesn't stand on its own. It has to have a song after it.
Because I grew up in the 80s and listening to mostly metal and riffs, of course. And I was talking to Don Dokken and Mick Brown a couple of months ago about the metal scene in the 80s, and sort of when the metal peaked. I'm not going to say what they said, but according to you, when do you think metal peaked in the 80s?
I think it peaked probably a year before Nirvana came on the scene. So probably, well, I think probably the end of the 80s. I think the 90s started to be when it really started to decline. And I think one of the reasons why it started to decline is because there was such a load of crap out there. And you know, you suddenly had the hair bands coming out. It was only about what they looked like and how many parties they could have and how many 14-year-old girls they could pull after the show. I mean, the music was rubbish, and they destroyed what the rest of us created because everyone got lumped in together with it. So when the hair band era came and grunge came on the scene, that's when it stopped. So I'd say end of the 80s, certainly no longer than 90, 91. I think that was about it.
Don Dokken said, Monsters of Rock 1988 was his answer. And I guess that was when 2 people were killed at the Guns N' Roses show, and they canceled Monsters of Rock the next year. But it all seems to me like...
MTV killed metal. What the hell's he talking about? Monsters of Rock was a great event. You know, people die and everything, don't they? Well, I guess we should stop all the airplanes from flying too, then, hey, Don? You know, I mean, he has his own attitude about it all, you know. As far as I'm concerned, he's got about as much to do with metal as, you know, as balsa would. So, you know, I don't think he's the right person to ask the question to. You know, I don't think it was MTV murdered it, because MTV, that was built upon heavy metal music, suddenly went, oh, no more of that, and they started to give it to everyone else. And then Headbangers Ball suddenly went away. Oh, we've had enough of you. MTV killed heavy metal music, and it became pretty close to killing good rock and roll as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. But I don't think it was in any way, shape, or form that you can point to Monsters of Rock just because of that. Other people have died. And if that's the case, then why didn't it die when those people died at the Who concert? That was a hell of a lot longer ago than that.